I've been a fan of city building games for a long time. There's something really satisfying about creating a miniature world and watching it come to life. Most of these games contain detailed and complex simulations of a city, and it's these details that let you sink dozens of hours into building and optimizing your creations. But recently I played a city builder that's the exact opposite. It's tiny and it's simple. So simple, in fact, that I can explain all of the rules in about a minute. You start with an empty island and a simple choice between two different packs of buildings. You can place your chosen buildings anywhere, but the point of the game is to maximize the number of points each building is worth, and these points are based on adjacency bonuses. So for example, lumberjacks like to be put near trees, so you'll gain points. But parks don't like to be near lumberjacks, so you'd lose points. Every building has its own set of adjacency rules. When you gain enough points, you'll level up, and this lets you choose another pack of buildings and keep playing. And eventually, if you level up enough times, you'll move on to the next level. On the other hand, if you run out of buildings, you lose. And that's the whole game. It only has 3 mechanics: choosing your building packs, placing your buildings, and leveling up.
Nice.
The most complicated part is learning all of those different adjacency rules. There's 30 different buildings and over 100 different interactions between them. But thankfully most of these are pretty intuitive because of the strong city building metaphor. The shaman is reclusive, and so he doesn't like to be near the city centres. And the brewery, of course, likes to go in between your hop fields and your taverns. And warehouses like to be in the middle of all of your different industrial buildings. Once you learn these rules, they're easy to remember because they mesh with your knowledge of real cities. Mark Rosewater, the lead designer of Magic the Gathering, calls this piggybacking. Basically, you want to piggyback on your player's existing knowledge of the world to make your mechanics feel simpler. It's like how a dragon will breathe fire and a zombie will resurrect. Every player knows these things, and so by building your mechanics around them, you can keep things easy to follow. Another name for this idea is form follows function. I gotta admit that sometimes I do still forget some of the building interactions, but the game helps you out by displaying a points preview above your mouse. So this means you can sweep across the ground searching for that very best spot. And this is really handy for new players because they can find the locally maximal move even if they don't know all of the rules and strategy yet. And there's a bunch of extra wrinkles that inject a lot of tactics into this game. So some buildings have a larger circle of effect than others. For example, fields have a small radius, but mills have a large radius. And this means that you'll get more points if you place your fields first and your mills afterwards. This is especially true for buildings like the market, the tower, and the balloon, because their circles are so massive. On top of this, some interactions are asymmetric, meaning that A might affect B, but B might not affect A. So for example, the walls like to be placed in between a bunch of different buildings, but most buildings don't like to be placed near walls. So this means that walls are best placed towards the end of a level to finish off a completed area. The rules are also cleverly set up so that you're encouraged to divide that map into regions that are easier to think about. So it helps to have a separation between your city area and your natural area, because some buildings prefer one of these over the other. And within the city, it helps to have a separation between your housing district and your rich mansion district. That's because the houses like drinking and they like the circus, whereas mansions hate the circus, but they like jewelry. So there's a lot of nuance contained within these simple mechanics, but it's equally important to notice a mechanic that doesn't exist. Unlike virtually all building games, you can't delete things, and you also can't move things. So once you put a building down, it's there forever.
Forever!
And this restriction has a massive impact. You might innocently place down a house somewhere only to realize 50 or 100 turns later that you've screwed yourself. That would have been the perfect spot for a marketplace, but now it doesn't fit. And this means that the game has long-term strategy arcs. Every single move leaves ripples that can affect all of your future moves. It reminds me of another famous game, and bear with me because this is a weird comparison, but it's like Go. In Go, two players gradually fill up a board with stones. You can capture your opponent's stones, but this is actually quite rare most of the time, and so in a typical game, the board will become more and more full the longer you play. And this means that a stone you played 100 turns ago might actually end up determining the winner in the end. And it's for this reason that many people consider Go to be the deepest game ever made, despite its very simple rule set. And I think that Islanders captures a little bit of this depth for itself, because you're forbidden from moving old pieces. You have to live with all of your previous decisions, and hopefully work them all into your master plan. And this depth is even more surprising when you consider just how much simpler the game is than everything else in the genre, like SimCity or Civilization. The building genre does, after all, have its roots in simulation, where the developer is trying to capture and recreate as many of the details of the real world as they can. And while this complexity can help players sink many dozens of hours into these games, it can also throw up a smokescreen where it's hard to pick out which mechanics are the most important and which are just nice extras. Let me ask you a question. What is the core mechanic of Civilization? Is it placing your city centers? Or is it advancing through the tech tree? Or maybe it's controlling your scouts and your armies as you go into battle. Honestly, it's hard to say which mechanic is the most central because the game has so many. However, after playing Islanders, I think I can identify the core. On the most basic level, every building game asks you this question: what should I build? Where should I build it? And when is the best time to build it? These are really broad questions, but Islanders answers them in an extremely simple and yet surprisingly deep way. You build things in the locations and the ordering that maximizes your points total, and those points depend entirely on adjacencies. So the core is placing buildings in a way that maximizes adjacency bonuses. And from this perspective, you can see that virtually all city builders have adjacency bonuses at the heart of their design. Cities Skylines is all about transportation networks, connecting the various residential, commercial, and industrial parts of your city, and this makes the relative positioning of these areas very important. Factorio is all about logistics, connecting your various machines with conveyor belts, and those belt networks take up space, meaning you gotta think carefully about how you lay out your factory. Oxygen Not Included has a similar deal, but with pipes and vents that move liquids and gases between your various machines. And in Civilization, you need to place your city centers near the food, production, and luxury resources that will let their populations grow. And these resources are so important that they're often worth going to war over. Even the games made decades ago have a focus on adjacencies, like Pharaoh, a personal favorite of mine, where your citizens have a ladder of needs and they level up depending on how many facilities are near them. In retrospect, it seems obvious to me that adjacency bonuses are the unifying glue of all of these games. But before I played Islanders, I wouldn't have known, because the sheer simplicity of this game's design is what made that core so visible. But once I did see it, I started seeing similar cores in games all up and down the genre. And this simplicity has another major benefit. It makes Islanders an ideal prototype to build larger games on top of. So let me give one example. Imagine a game just like Islanders, but maybe there could be a world map with different regions, like a forest island and a desert island and a mountainous island. And if you earn enough points on those islands, maybe you could unlock a handful of extra and unique buildings. So it's kind of like a tech tree. And then maybe your islands could trade with each other, so you could use those unlocked buildings in the other regions. And eventually, maybe you could make a capital city that uses every single kind of building you've unlocked to create the highest possible standard of living for your citizens. I think that this could give the player a clear goal to work towards and a satisfying final challenge. Of course, that's just one possible way to expand on the game. There's a whole bunch of other ways you could do it, and maybe you even have some ideas of your own. And that, to me, is what makes Islanders so valuable. The city building genre is full of large and complicated games, but the complexity of these games makes it hard to theory craft how big changes would play out. But on the other hand, Islanders is the most minimal city builder that I can possibly imagine. The central idea of placing down a series of buildings one by one with the goal of maximizing their adjacency bonuses is simple and deep, and it leaves a lot of room for expansion too. And therefore, this system could easily become the foundation for a wide variety of more complex city builders. And if I ever get the chance to make a city builder myself, the lessons that I've learned from Islanders will definitely be a key inspiration. Of course, for now I'm still fully focused on Patch Quest, my action roguelike where you can mount and ride all of the enemies in the game, which lets you use their animal-inspired skills in combat. If you want to learn more about Patch Quest, you can click through to this summary video now. This month, I'm adding a bunch of new dungeons to the game, and once that's done, I'll be uploading a new devlog episode, so be sure to stay tuned for that. And the game can also now be wishlisted on Steam. Anyway, that's all for now, and as always, thanks for watching.